Hi, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. As promised, I have a guest on the show, the first time I've done this since I used to work in radio, RedPagan Nikole, and I will let her tell you about herself, and then we will move on to other questions after that. If you were here, then I would invite you to partake also, but we will get to that eventually, audience participation. But I'm not doing that quite yet because I have to figure out the timing and getting all that straight. So for the time being, it'll be a recording that I will upload to YouTube. So Nikole, who is the person who is the reason why I am in the communist tendency I am in again. But I will let her tell you about that afterwards. First, tell us about yourself, please.
Well, so I'm just kind of a typical, just a typical person. I was actually born in California. I live in Northern California. I actually live in Portland, Oregon now, but I um, came from a pretty, I would say, labor aristocrat family. You know, we never really rented or we never owned anything. We
Can you
always
explain
rented.
what's meant by labor aristocrat for the uninitiated in the
So
audience?
labor aristocrats are people that essentially work for a living, but typically don't really they don't typically own property. They're typically people that make just enough to kind of be comfortable, scoot by pretty much, but just to have enough for the basic necessities in life. But they are their living situation typically revolves around giving money each month to a landlord.
Hmm?
So that was kind of my family background. We kind of we didn't really have a whole lot, but it was a pretty decent upbringing. um
What did your
I
parents do for a living?
So I was actually raised by my grandparents, and I
Oh,
was
okay.
actually and my grandparents were ended up working for the California State Hospital System. So they were involved with, I guess it's not politically correct anymore, but it was used to be referred to as like the criminally insane. But essentially, they worked with people that went through the court system and had committed often heinous crimes, but were deemed um, not guilty by reason of insanity and were instead put in these institutions. So they happened to at the time work at the state hospital in Napa. So I was where I typically grew up, was in the Napa Valley area.
Yeah.
And so and then as I grew up and I eventually would move away. As I got into adulthood, I slowly started questioning whole um my whole reason for my whole reason for being, and I was just kind of really lost. And it was a that was event and eventually I just kind of started I ended up falling into essentially into Marxism. I started really kind of slowly making my transition from the kind of from the I would call myself a libertarian rightist at that time, because when I
Hmm?
was about 16, that would be about what I was. And
Like Murray Rothbard?
I would honestly say, yeah, somewhere along those lines. Probably me. I wouldn't go as far as saying Ayn Rand, because I always hated Ayn Rand. I thought she was kind of a bit of a blowhard, but I would definitely say that, yeah, I would definitely say very libertarian or liberal conservative was kind of how I was. But that was when I was like, you know, 16, and I was still kind of a little, pain in the butt back then in high school. Um, so yeah, I've just live in Portland now, and I actually got here because my ex-wife, she wanted to move out of California, and she thought, well, we should try to make a better place, and she thought, oh, Portland. So I eventually moved with her, and even though our marriage didn't work out, I ended up staying. And to be quite honest, it's one of those things, as California gets more and more bourgeois and just very much harder to live in, financially. Yeah, I don't really plan on going back there to live. I don't mind going home to visit people. I miss people back there, but it's like I've built a pretty comfortable life and just support system around me here. So I'm pretty comfortable with where I'm at.
Good. It's always good to be comfortable where you are. In a more general sense, if somebody were to walk up to you, Nikole, and say, "Who are you?" What would you say?
I'm just in general just a pretty down to earth person. I don't really, give a care what people really think of me. Um, I'm a trans woman. And uh, essentially, for those that aren't familiar with the whole idea of transgender people or like transitioning, essentially, it's what it is that it is a person's journey when they make the life decision to transition from one gender to the other. And it's very important to understand that there is a major difference between sex and gender. And
one is biological, the other is sociological.
Exactly. And it's one of those things that transgender people, our gender doesn't align with our biological sex, or as we like to say, our gender assigned at birth. So it's one of those things that in September of 2019, after years really of self-doubt, self-questioning, I made the decision to begin the transition, and begin the process of going from male to female. And so transitioning can mean a lot of things, but it typically just means that for a lot of people, it is that leap of faith, but from male to female, female to male. Some people medically transition, in which they go on hormones. They for trans women, it's estrogen. For trans men, it's testosterone. And if you're non-binary, gender fluid, whatever the case is, and it can be either one of those. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. And then there's some people that intend to get the surgery. For my I actually have a really close friend of mine. He and I have transitioned right at basically the same time. And he, a couple of years ago, he ended up having the double mastectomy so that he could, look more masculine. And I intend to eventually have a full, surgery to, have more female characteristics. I'll leave it at broad terms there. But that's essentially how that's essentially what transitioning is. And so, yeah, I'm a trans woman, and and my gender does not align with what I was biologically assigned at birth.
Mhm.
And I had to come to um, I had to come to those terms with myself through years of pain and just struggling with, you know, with my identity, both, my gender identity, my political identity,
Mhm.
just who I was as a person.
I can tell you, I maybe about a year ago, I was in a Chinese restaurant here in well, right next door in McAllen, Texas, and I happened to meet a trans woman there accidentally because I heard them talking about communism and socialism, and I said, "Hey, I'm a commie," and it turns out that one of the people at the table was a trans woman, and so I she came over at my table and sat down and we chatted, and something I had always been concerned about for trans women, I should say, is the difficulty with the voice. That once your voice changes, it's almost you really can't go back to having a pre-pubescent voice. But she somehow managed to affect a female voice, and it was extraordinarily impressive the way she did it. Her voice was deep, but it sounded feminine. Is that something that you plan to work on too?
It's actually something that I've keep putting off actually, but it's on my list of things to do. I actually it's it's a process. It takes it's pretty much no different than how it is with singers, or or people that or even actors, who have to train
Mhm,
themselves to sing in a certain octave, or or talk in a certain accent. It's
mhm.
kind of the same thing with voice training, specifically for trans women, because um, unlike with trans men who can take testosterone and
Yes.
their voices naturally get lower, estrogen does not, unfortunately, do the same thing. And so you actually have to train for that. And what happens is that you really have to, from what I've learned, is that you have to kind of raise the way that you talk up here. And obviously, I have not trained in that, so I'm not so I'm far from being a master at that.
She
But
did not do that. Her voice was very deep. It was deep, but
yeah,
it was kind. This is before your time, but there was a singer called Ethel Merman, and she used to be on the old Ed Sullivan show all the time, and she had a really deep singing voice, but she was a cisgender, meaning she was born female and she was female, and yet, you know, she sounded had a very deep voice, but it sounded feminine too, and that's the way this person sounded that I met in at
yeah,
the Chinese restaurant. She didn't raise her voice, but she learned how to talk, and I guess what she thought was a feminine way, and it worked very well.
yeah, and again, all that does take certain training and stuff like
Mhm,
that, because you have to kind of find that area in the back of your throat that
mhm.
that works for you. um for me, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not you know trying to sound like Reese Witherspoon from Legally Blonde or anything like that. But because in my family, the women in our family, our voices typically tend to be a little bit on the lower range. Like my mother, like she's very much kind of got a um very kind of low, raspy sort of a voice too. And I often joke because people say that, when people make off color comments about me, I typically am like, well, then you don't, my then I guess my cisgender mother who grows, grows little chin hairs, and she has to she has to shave too, and who talks in a kind of a lower, raspier voice and stuff like that. I get, it's like, what does that make her less of a woman just because of that? Even though she's literally born a woman, identifies as a woman, like, no. And so I intend to work on my voice, but it's just kind of not been one of those things that's been a
Hasn't been a
priority for
priority,
me. Yeah.
I mentioned before that it is because of you that I am in the communist tendency that I am in today, which I was in the past briefly, under the influence of the great autodidact Jason Unruh, the self-taught scholar Jason Unruh, who will be starting university in September, which I'm very happy that he's doing. I think he will be a brilliant student when he starts. And so I'm wondering, can you tell us about your experiences in communism, how you first became a communist, what stages you've gone through, if you've been in more than one tendency, what are they, and how you would define yourself right now?
So as I stated, it's like when I was a teenager, I was just really that typical, just pain in the butt, liberal conservative person. But I think I started kind of seeing things a lot differently shortly after Barack Obama was elected, and after California had
He was
at
a
the
real
time,
disappointment, wasn't he?
when California was trying to criminalize or put a constitutional amendment to essentially define marriages between a man and a woman, which later got overturned. And granted, most Californians these days look back on as a real black stain, but I just kind of became really disillusioned with how modern American conservatism was going, and I started kind of drifting more towards the left. And so when I graduated high school, I was at that time would have been I was a registered Democrat. I was very much would have been considered pretty liberal. But as time kind of slowly went on, I became just more disillusioned and more frustrated with the state of America, and just the material conditions that people were living in, and how people treated the poor. And eventually I actually think it was probably about 2009 or so, 2010, when I had actually started listening to Jason and a few other people in the leftist community, and I started kind of just taking note, taking thought of it. At the time, I didn't really believe in it, but then I finally started in 2012 reading theory, Marxist theory. I started reading works by Lenin, and just slowly started coming to terms with the idea that, yeah, this all makes sense. And yeah, capitalism does seem to be, it does seem to be the big problem here. It seems to be the common denominator. So so it was probably about that time I would have started considering myself a Marxist, or Marxist Leninist. And over the years, I started just independently reading and independently studying, and just became more of a scholar of Marxist theory, Marxist philosophy.
You are a scholar.
And that's still something that I would even still say that I am today. I'm a lifelong scholar of it, and it's over time I would pick up Maoist theory. I would read the works of Ho Chi Minh, of Fidel Castro, and I became more and more ingrained into communism itself. So I would say that as of this point, I still consider myself, Marxist-Leninist, of course. I would also consider myself a Maoist third worldist because I actually understand
what
the
is Maoism
struggle.
third worldism? And how is, first, how is Maoism third worldism different from classical Marxism Leninism? And second, how many Maoist third worldists are there?
I wouldn't even really know how many Maoist third worldists there are. I mean, there's a lot of people that claim to be Maoist third worldists, but there's just like being, claiming to be a socialist or a leftist. It's
like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I would argue that that words are kind of meaningless these days. So because anybody can just call themselves something, but Maoist third worldism is essentially, to me, a extension of Marxist and Marxist-Leninist thought. It is just an updated version that was essentially inspired, by the teachings of Mao Zedong and the idea that that essentially, well, to start with, let's also focus on the idea of third worldism, because Marxist theory was largely intended to be applied to the industrial first world, that
Europe.
eventually the material conditions would become so bad that we would rise up, and obviously that didn't happen.
By the end of the 19th century was the prediction that they gave, and of course that deadline passed with no significant transformation in those countries.
And so largely what third worldism is kind of comes to that whole, it comes to that idealization that, that Marx was wrong in that respect, that likely revolution will not occur in the first world. It's going to occur in more likely in the third world, the places that are, well, quite often the victims of imperialism, colonialism, and just the exploitation of capitalism that has come from that. And the idea that nowadays we have it's becoming more and more evident that resistance in the first world is probably the most that we're going to see, and that revolution in the third world is going to become more,
how would you
more of a
define
praxis.
Resistance? First world meaning the West or the global North, for those who don't know. What do you mean by resistance in the first world? What forms would that take?
I would say to some degree, it would be standing up to the injustices that exist within the first world.
Which you've done yourself in that wonderful documentary that you put together, which I think is one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen on YouTube.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of standing up towards, for instance, the standing up against Zionism and the genocide that's going on in Gaza, standing up for for those that are homeless and those that are poor, those that, or those who, like my mother, try to, show humanitarianism and then are demonized for it, or actually like punished for it. And so it's because at this point, humanitarianism basically is has become a form of resistance. And if you continue to stand, stand steadfast in your humanitarianism, then there, and you are being an advocate for the poor, being an advocate for trans rights, gay rights, for Palestinians. That is a form of resistance, going
You
out there
say
and
that,
protesting.
yeah, would you say, for example, that people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, people like that, people who call themselves democratic socialists, progressives, social democrats, really social democrats or progressives, um, are kind of halfway there because they are doing the resistance part, although they are lacking the revolution. So to Bernie Sanders, revolution became a slogan, basically a political slogan for his own social democracy.
I would consider them to be more of an anomaly. I think
mm,
honestly they're more. I would consider them to be kind of, if anything, more of a distraction. That, like, they provide a hope for a lot of people that still, like, you know, continue to perpetuate the idea of the liberal democracy, and
mm,
that somehow that will achieve change. But yeah, I do. But at most, I think that it stirs the pot a little bit.
mm.
But yeah, they're but I don't know necessarily if I would consider them active, like active resistance. But I think that active resistance does come from those that actually are actually getting out there, and like, for those that are actively getting out there and protesting against the genocide in Gaza. I think the student protests are definitely an act of resistance.
Would you
I
say
think
that Black Lives Matter is also in that
I
category?
think I would definitely consider that a resistance, and
mm mm.
definitely a product of the the systemic issues have been that have come because of capitalism. Yes.
I know, for example, that having discussed communism with many people, when some people bring up the kinds of things that you talked about, people who are basically uh, first worldists, who basically think that there can be revolution right now in the first world, then people will say, well, you're not really a communist. Uh, you are just a progressive. But I think that what you are saying then is something a little bit different, that in a sense, um, all that the West can do right now, all that the first world can do right now is something similar to progressivism because we haven't gotten there yet, or we don't have enough uh, dialectical or revolutionary potential to stage
Yeah.
revolutions yet.
Yeah.
Mm.
I would definitely say that we have a long way to go. It really is the fact that it's not even a fact of just trying to essentially wear down the ruling class, wear down the status quo. It really is that we have to wear down this whole, I would say, this whole belief system that most Americans still cling to, that it's that, oh, we can just vote people out, and that will eventually change things. We have to kind of get beyond that. We have to overcome that situation and realize it doesn't really matter who you vote for, because so long as there is a duopoly or monopoly or any
Explain what you mean
form
by
of
duopoly.
two-party system, in this case the
Yeah.
Democrats and the Republicans holding
Mm,
essentially holding power, or so yeah, and really just two sides of the same coin.
mm,
Both are very much conservative ideologies. I think most of us would tend to argue that the Republicans are definitely very more openly fascistic,
mm.
whereas Democrats are very very cunning with theirs. They're very more reserved with it, but we are starting to see more of that kind. The saying of the quiet parts out loud. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. 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 Um, so, as a Maoist third worldist and the person who brought me back into it, I'm very grateful to you. And I see you as my mentor, to be honest, even though you're quite a bit younger than me. But almost everyone is quite a bit younger than me, so that's nothing new. But uh, as a Maoist third worldist, when you look at the situation in the third world today, where in most places there does not seem to be uh, much of an inclination toward revolution, and in fact, where uh, there is just as much capitalism in many third world countries and fourth world areas of the world as there is in the first world. So, how do you think that the third and fourth worlds, or just the third world, can break itself out of that and actually develop revolutionary consciousness?
um, honestly, kind of it really. I think this kind of plays into really what I do, what my channel is kind of all about. It's outreach, it's
Mm,
resistance, it's education.
mm, mm,
You an educated. I've always said that an educated proletariat is an armed proletariat, because um, an educated mass of working class or downtrodden people who are, who have been beaten down by their systems or even their authoritarian regimes for so long. If they're more conscious of the material conditions, and they're more educated to that there's more to life than just essentially being just another drone, another, just another body for the machines to work the machines. Then eventually those people will start to come to the realization that, huh, yeah, and the worse society, and the more that we educate them and realize, hey, society is pretty crappy and it's only going to continue to get worse, it's not going to get better. Then it's like, okay, there's more to life than this, and we're not going to stand for this. We need to do something. And
Do you
I
think
found,
that the concept of the empire, which was coined by a pair of autonomists, although I am not an autonomist, I like that term, referring to the American empire, that the fact that the third world is not the imperialist center of the world, that instead that imperialist center is the U.S. and the first world, that is what gives the third world and the fourth world more potential to rise up and start revolutions against the capitalist world system.
I do actually. I think, in fact, I would make the argument that, in a society that is large, or in a world that is largely influenced by the, the larger powers that be, whether that be Britain, the United States, even China, it's one of those things that we may not have a sense of direct, like, rule of these powers over countries anymore, like, how, say, Britain did with like a quarter of the globe at one point. But it's the political, it's the economical influences that they've got, the sway that they have over these countries. And it is that that is, in my opinion, kind of what is, I believe, is the new age of imperialism, the new colonialism. And the long, and as those empires, as we see, start to fall like dominoes, other powers will, of course, will come to, other powers will grow, but I believe that in the state of decline that we're seeing empires like the US and the UK disintegrate, we're going to see probably more revolutions that are going to happen in the third world, because that chain of bondage, the shackles that they've been bound to are going to be broken. Yeah. So we're going to see what we will probably see we're already kind of starting to see like waves of disintegration like that in a lot of countries in West Africa right now. Like we've been, I think in the last couple of years, we've been seeing, I think there's been a couple of coups in, Guinea and Mali, and I think Niger, I think it was as well. We're going to see more of that. We're going to see a lot. I think Africa is one particular continent that we will need to pay attention to. Certain parts of the Arab world, I would even say, probably might want to pay attention to. I also think that the situation that's kind of playing out right now in Myanmar is really complicated, but it might be a potential to keep in mind. Maybe not at the moment, but in the years to come, and certainly going into the next decade, that part of the world will be interesting to see. So I don't know. It's like I'm not necessarily I'm no oracle or anything like that, but it's one of those things where
I'm a very bad oracle.
But it's one of those things where it's like I think we are going to see a lot. I think we're going to see a lot more of those happen as those shackles get broken, because it's really it's kind of funny when you think about the idea of domino theory, because it wasn't just this boogeyman thing about one nation falling to communism and the others falling. No, it works the other way around with capitalism. It's like those material conditions continue to affect those first world nations. As they start to disintegrate, so does their influence and their hold over the third world. And like I said, we're already in the beginning stages of that.
I'm interested, the first part of your nickname, which of course is Red Pagan, sort of brings together red, communist, and then pagan. So I'm interested in how you develop paganism, what kind of paganism you have adopted, and how, if at all, you relate paganism to communism or Marxism.
So as I typically tend to try to keep my beliefs as separate as I can from my political leanings. Like every once in a while, I might post like something in a special segment on my channel, but I try to keep it about as far as pushed to the back burner as I can, because the very concept of Marxism, Leninism is that religion can be, it typically tends to distract and can be even quite harmful to socialism. The very idea of scientific socialism is that we believe in scientific praxis and philosophical praxis. It's not the praxis of incorporating your religion into any sort of thing. But at the same time, while I am a Marxist, while I do practice revolutionary theory, and I am still does not take away from the fact that privately, yes, I'm pagan. And my before I converted to paganism, which was October 29th of 2014, I was pretty largely an atheist. I would say that though that a lot I again part of my whole self-questioning and self-discovery and just self-doubt about myself eventually kind of led me to multiple parts of my life where I just would discover this is who I am, or this just seems to fit me a lot better.
I know
You
some
know, tw-
some pagans and Wiccans call themselves atheists because to them, for example, the horn god and Diana are forces of nature, not actually
yeah.
beings. How do you relate to that idea?
I mean, I could honestly see that. There are some people would, that prefer to believe in the natural world, the elements, and
Mhm.
some people that just in general, their religion is more based on the practice of witchcraft
Would you
rather
call that a
than,
kind of animism?
yeah, I would basically, I would say that animism definitely fits it pretty well. I would also say to some degree, there's some people that believe like in animalism as well. The idea that, you know, that animals are, you know, sacred spirits, you know, even say kindred spirits in a way.
Mhm.
Um, but
Especially cats, from what I've seen and read.
oh yeah, cats especially. I but yeah, I basically started to I had been dating for a while a woman who is a Kemetic pagan, which is the belief in the Egyptian gods.
Mhm.
And I also had a cousin. I have a cousin that also is a Wiccan, and so over time I kind of started kind of talking after the conversations I had had with both of them over time. I had started kind of developing this sense that this does seem like something that would be interesting. And at first it was just kind of dabbling with Wicca and kind of studying that, but eventually I would find myself um, trying, you know, really hard trying to practice and believe in the Roman mythology, the Roman gods and goddesses.
Mhm.
That eventually, I kind of feel in
Roman
a
gods
way
and
that
goddesses are basically renamed,
Juno, Jupiter,
yeah,
yeah,
renamed Egyptian gods and goddesses, right? So it's the
or even Greco,
similar.
yeah, yeah, and I am that type of person that just kind of I guess there was a part of me that just knew that what that didn't fit, that was not that was that somehow just was not conducive to me or like my background, my heritage, or anything like that. And it didn't really help that going through my marriage, which many who are part of my audience will know was a very emotionally, verbally, mentally, and
Abusive.
sexually abusive
Mhm.
relationship. It was, and I kind of did start having that lack of faith and going through that period of self doubt and self criticism and questioning myself. And then eventually that led me um, in 2019 to start um, when I started my transition as a trans woman. I started really started getting more spirit into my spiritual beliefs again, and trying to work on myself and like who I really was as a
Mhm.
person.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was when I started kind of getting started looking into like more of my family history, and I started realizing, okay, well, we have
Ancestry.com.
yeah, and when I basically
Mhm.
started realizing, okay, hey, we've got Scots Irish heritage,
Mhm.
so and our family is it's like, oh my God, our family is descended from the Vikings.
Mhm.
And so I started getting into a kind of a eclectic form of like Norse and Celtic belief systems, which I've largely kind of, I wouldn't say abandoned exactly, because I still hold a very, keen part of Celtic mythology in my heart. But I would largely say that it just, like Roman mythology, it wasn't conducive to me, and I felt more at home with
It wasn't your
the,
trip, as we used to say back in the 60s.
and I felt more at home my with my Norse gods and goddesses, more specifically during my transition, very much close to goddess Freya, who is the warrior goddess, and to me, a
Mhm.
goddess of female empowerment. And she was all
Kind
that,
of like Xena.
yeah.
Mhm.
She and she's always kind of been that spiritual, that spiritual connection that I've needed. And so yeah, that's where I stand today, is that I am very much a devoted, um devoted to heathenry, to my Viking roots, to my Norse heritage, and um not just the fact that it's Norse heritage, but also the fact that well, I can trace my lineage even back to the Kven people up in northern Finland. And so um so like this is, so in a way I like to refer to it as like it was the gods trying to reach out to me, my ancestral heritage trying to reach out to me.
Mhm.
And why, quite frankly, those that, and it's also a reason why I take it very seriously, because there's so many people that claim to be Odinists or Norse pagans, but use that so evilly and for their own hatred, their own bigotry, their own political, uh, their own political reasons. And the people that try to use it for those particular reasons, I find that very offensive, because not only because I find it culturally appropriative, but very religiously appropriative.
Mhm.
Because you're essentially trying to invoke that imagery, that the spirituality, for your own hatred. And it's like, no, that's not what the religion is about. Our religion is about, it is about being virtuous, it's about honesty, it's about integrity, it's about, the loyalty isn't towards a race, it's towards your family, your kin. And quite frankly, in my opinion, that doesn't mean blood. That means people that, it could be your blood, but it could also be, those that are like family to you. And
Mhm.
there's quite a lot of people that in my life that are not related to me, but I consider them family, and I am devotedly loyal to them.
Mhm.
So
Good, good. Um, Aside from the subjects that we've broached in this interview, is there any other topic that you would like to discuss?
um I think honestly, right now, that's about all I got.
Okay,
I think that pretty much describes
that is acceptable. Yes.
the pretty acceptable bulk of about what Red Pagan Nikole is really about. What essentially my channel is about. It's there's Red Pagan Nikole, the person, who is, a trans woman, Norse pagan, who's, devoted to her spirituality and her family, her friends, but is also a communist. And on that is try and while I try to keep that separate, it
Mhm.
still I still cannot deny that both of those are a very, essential part of my life.
Okay, let me ask you one final question, and this
Sure.
is basically a question for I guess imagination or sort of speculation. Supposing that the world continues, which I am not entirely sure of myself. Where do you see yourself 30, 40 years from now? Who do you see yourself
Hopefully,
as being?
hopefully, well, 30, 40 years from now, I'll probably be in my 60s,
Mm-hmm.
70s. So it'll be,
Which is where I am.
yeah. So honestly, I'm hoping to still be able to mentor others, being able to educate people, just kind of giving, my thoughts and opinions on life and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. But at the same time, I'm kind of hoping to, be, uh, I'm also hoping to be in some way kind of more in touch with my spirituality, and like being someone that can not only just be there as a mentor or an educator, but also in a way as like a healer person to talk to. I would say to some degree, I kind of already do that for some people, um, but I want to just kind of be that comforting voice, or just that voice that people need to hear, to be like, hey, what's going on with this whole thing, or hey, I'm really dealing with this sort of problem, and I'm just having, like, it's just kind of one of those things where I just somebody to talk to, a um like I said, I'm no oracle by any means, but you know, I guess if somebody wants to call, see it that way, somebody that they can go to for any sort of advice, whether it's political, spiritual, whatever.
Okay. I wanted to thank our guest for today, RedPagan Nikole. It has been a delight to have her on the show today. And there is a link to her YouTube channel under My Comrades in the discussion section. If she gives me any other links, I will place them directly below this video as well. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave those below this, and either Nikole or myself will be able to answer those questions for you. So for the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.